Oh my God!
You're funny.
Came the rain and
What the fuck?
what? The elephant of the deep blue sea. If you are to be a true woman. It's soothing to the soul and can be. You will fight me, mister.
At the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to two US-based podcasters named Teddy and Wallace, who host a show called the Not See Party. In this particular episode, they review a viral video of an influencer known as the Kill Bill Kid, who accidentally severed his own leg with a katana. Instead of showing any sympathy for the poor guy, Wallace and Teddy burst into laughter. Recognizing an opportunity, Wallace decides to track down the Kill Bill Kid for an in-person interview, explaining to Teddy that the influencer is currently more famous than they are. After Teddy announces the upcoming interview to their listeners, Wallace flies to Canada to meet him. However, upon arriving at the influencer's home, Wallace is shocked by what he discovers. Driven to despair by relentless internet trolling, the Kill Bill Kid has tragically taken his own life. Realizing his trip to Canada might be a waste, Wallace stops at a local bar for a drink and calls Teddy. He explains that the kid committed suicide with his own sword, but assures Teddy that he won't be returning from Winnipeg empty-handed. After hanging up, Wallace heads to the restroom, where he notices a flyer posted on the wall. It was left by a man named Howard Howe, an eccentric retired seafarer who claims to have a lifetime of extraordinary voyage stories to share. According to the note, Howard lives in a massive mansion in Manitoba and is looking for a lodger who will listen to his tales in exchange for free room and board. Intrigued, Wallace keeps the note with him. He arrives at a store and buys a couple of milkshakes for the trip, and follows his GPS to Howard's estate at Pippy Hill. When he arrives, the front door mysteriously swings open on its own. Shrugging it off, he eagerly enters the mansion, where he finds Howard sitting in a wheelchair on the upper floor. Howard welcomes him warmly, insisting that Wallace just call him Howard. Before they sit down, Wallace asks to use the restroom. After relieving himself, Wallace comes out and finds Howard politely preparing tea for him. He sits down, takes a sip of the tea, remarking on its unique flavor, and shows Howard the flyer he found at the bar. Howard strikes up a friendly conversation, asking Wallace about his background. Wallace explains that he lives in Los Angeles and hosts a podcast focused on storytelling. Howard mentions that while his legs no longer work, his sharp memory allows him to vividly recall his many adventures, which is exactly what Wallace wants to hear. As Wallace continues to praise the unusual tea, Howard quotes Ernest Hemingway, "Always do sober what you said you'd do drunk." He then astoundingly claims to have met Hemingway himself off the coast of Normandy during Operation Neptune, where Howard was serving as a Navy cook. Howard points out a vintage wine bottle on display, claiming it was the very bottle he shared with the legendary man. Fascinated, Wallace gets up to inspect it, calling it the coolest thing he has ever seen. Suddenly, his eyes catch sight of a strange object on a nearby stand, the penis bone of a walrus. Seeing Wallace's curiosity, Howard explains that Alaskans call it an usik and describes its biological function. When Wallace asks how he acquired it, Howard begins a dramatic story from 1959. He explains that he was working as a cook on a ship in the Gulf of Anadar, off the southern coast of Siberia, hunting for a mythical 25-foot, 3-ton Siberian great white shark, when the ship sank, leading to a fateful encounter with a walrus that would ultimately save his life. In the inky darkness of the night, their ship collided with an iceberg, completely wrecking the vessel. The entire expedition crew vanished into the freezing Black Sea in the blink of an eye. After the boat sank, Howard was left completely alone, struggling to stay afloat in the icy waters. He believed he was the only survivor, but he was mistaken. Something swift and terrifying suddenly brushed past him beneath the surface. Moments later, he realized that the creature was feasting on the remains of the expedition crew, terrifying him even further. Eventually, Howard awoke on the shore of a tiny island, coughing up seawater and feeling utterly disoriented. As he slowly got to his feet, he discovered the one responsible for saving his life, a walrus. Wallace is stunned by the story and can hardly believe what Howard is saying. Howard explains that the walrus was incredibly gentle and kept him warm by pressing him against its massive blubbery body, almost like a mother protecting her newborn child. As Howard continues telling the story, Wallace suddenly begins to feel sleepy. Howard then reveals that he named the walrus Mr. Tusk, after his former janitor at his school, Mr. Tuskegee, the only man he had ever truly trusted in his life. After taking one more sip of his tea, Wallace suddenly collapses to the floor. The movie then flashes back to an earlier moment when Wallace's girlfriend, Allie, was trying to stop him from traveling to Winnipeg, Canada, to interview the Kill Bill Kid. Wallace attempts to convince her by saying that he would return the very next morning after recording the podcast. He insists that the interview would greatly benefit their podcast channel and make it far more popular. Eventually, Wallace manages to convince Allie, and she reluctantly allows him to go. The story then returns to the present time. Wallace regains consciousness and finds himself in a massive room, strapped to a rocking chair with a cloth draped over his legs. Nearby, Howard sits in his wheelchair, calmly cleaning a sharp object, as though preparing to do something horrifying. Howard approaches Wallace and hands him a cup of milkshake. Confused, Wallace asks what happened to him the previous night. Howard casually explains that he was bitten by a highly venomous hobo spider, which caused him to pass out. Wallace then asks about his cell phone. Howard responds by claiming that Dr. Mosier accidentally stepped on it and broke it while treating him the previous night. Suddenly, Wallace realizes that he can no longer feel his legs. Panicking, he quickly pulls away the cloth covering them, only to be horrified by what he sees. His legs are gone. Wallace begins screaming in terror and demands to know why he is not in a hospital. Howard calmly explains that hospitals are full of diseases, so Dr. Mosier believed it would be safer for him to remain inside the sanitized room. Shaking with fear, Wallace begs Howard to call Dr. Mosier immediately. However, Howard simply makes another excuse, claiming that the doctor is currently making his rounds. With this, Howard bursts into laughter at Wallace's misery. At that moment, Wallace finally realizes that Howard is not mentally stable, but completely insane. Later that night, Howard offers Wallace food at the dining table, but there is one horrifying problem. Wallace can no longer move his arms either. Sitting restlessly in the chair, Wallace realizes that there was never any doctor to tend to him. There was no spider to bite him either, but the cunning Howard claimed that he had seen a hobo spider bite Wallace the night he passed out on the floor. He even claimed that Dr. Mosier was the one who diagnosed him with spider venom. Suddenly, Howard begins acting like a child, suggesting that he isn't mentally stable. Seeing this, Wallace bursts into screams. To Wallace's horror, the deranged Howard rises from his chair, walks over to him, and slaps him across the face, instantly silencing him and making him realize that he is truly trapped inside the giant mansion with him. The psychotic Howard calmly returns to his chair and starts explaining his plan to Wallace, who can do nothing but helplessly listen. Howard reveals that he has been constructing a highly realistic walrus suit for years, and he believes that with only a few minor modifications, the walrus suit will fit Wallace perfectly. Back in the United States, Allie breaks down in tears, complaining that Wallace never truly cared about her. He has always lied to her. She remained faithful to him, while Wallace betrayed her trust. In fact, Allie is devastated because Wallace hasn't even tried to contact her since leaving, and she now believes that he no longer loves her. Meanwhile, a hand appears out of nowhere and comforts the heartbroken Allie. Suddenly, Wallace's phone begins ringing on a nearby desk. Desperate, Wallace struggles to wheel his chair toward it, but by the time he manages to answer, the call disconnects. Allie becomes even more furious after getting no response from Wallace, completely unaware of the nightmare he is enduring in Canada. Desperate for help, Wallace calls Allie back, but she cannot answer because she is busy with an unknown man. Wallace leaves a voicemail explaining that he has been abducted by a psycho named Howard Howe in Manitoba and that he is in serious danger. He says Howard wants to turn him into a walrus or something and pleads with Allie to rescue him as soon as possible. Allie then tells the mysterious man to brush his teeth and come back to bed because she cannot live without him anymore. To our shock, the man turns out to be Teddy, Wallace's best friend, who has been betraying him from the very beginning. The desperate Wallace even calls Teddy, but Teddy completely ignores the call and returns to the bedroom. Wallace leaves him another voicemail explaining that he has been kidnapped by a psycho named Howard Howe and is being held captive inside his mansion. Howard has amputated his legs. Meanwhile, the insane Howard suddenly appears and strikes Wallace with a baseball bat, knocking him unconscious. He warns Wallace that his life as a human being is over. From now on, he will either become a walrus or be nothing at all. While brushing her teeth, Allie checks her phone and discovers Wallace's voicemail. In it, he desperately explains that he has been abducted by a psycho named Howard Howe, who amputated his legs and is holding him captive inside his mansion. Alarmed, Allie immediately wakes Teddy and informs him that Wallace is in grave danger in Canada. As Howard fits Wallace into the walrus suit, he explains that Mr. Tusk once cared for him on the island, like a parent caring for a child. Inside the surgery room, the walls are covered with disturbing sketches and diagrams illustrating how a walrus can supposedly be created using human organs. Inside the room, human skin hangs from the walls, indicating that Howard has been carrying out these horrifying experiments for a very long time. Sometime later, Howard completes the gruesome modifications to Wallace's body, making him suitable for the walrus suit. Meanwhile, Allie and Teddy arrive in Canada in search of Wallace. Howard has fully transformed Wallace into a walrus-like creature and now keeps him chained up. He calls him Mr. Tusk, after the name of his beloved walrus companion. Elsewhere, Teddy and Allie desperately search for Wallace across Canada, showing his photographs to locals. They eventually seek help from a local police station and file a missing person report. Teddy plays Wallace's voicemail for Detective Frank, but Frank initially doesn't believe the story and suggests that Wallace might simply be joking around. Teddy insists that Wallace would never take things this far. Detective Frank explains that he conducted a thorough investigation but could not find any trace of a man named Howard Howe anywhere in Manitoba. Frank also mentions that a man from Quebec recently visited him, claiming that he has been hunting a serial killer. Detective Frank gives Teddy and Allie the man's phone number and advises them to contact him. Meanwhile, Howard keeps Wallace inside a makeshift pool. He tells Wallace that if he truly wants to become a walrus, he must first learn how to swim. With that, Howard throws him into the water. Wallace screams at the top of his lungs, but there is no one nearby to help him. Underwater, Wallace discovers several decaying human corpses trapped inside walrus suits, revealing that Howard has been carrying out these horrifying experiments on innocent victims for years. Wallace is utterly horrified by the sight. Elsewhere, Teddy and Allie finally meet a detective named Guy Lapointe, who informs them that he has been hunting a creature named Howard Howe, an animal masquerading as a man, while in reality he is a monster hiding inside a human body. This serial killer has killed 23 innocent people so far, and if Wallace has been abducted by the same monster, the death toll will soon rise to 24. The method of killing has remained the same every time. The victims' legs are amputated at the knees, their arms are fused to their bodies, and their mouths and teeth are grotesquely mutilated. Guy asks Teddy and Allie to come closer, and whispers that he had already met Howard 2 years earlier in Quebec, while investigating the disappearance of a hockey player named Gregory Gumtree from Quebec City. He discovered Howard sitting on his porch, waiting for someone to deal with a hobo spider that was clogging his toilet. Howard mistook Guy for the exterminator, but Guy quickly clarified that he was a detective searching for Gregory Gumtree. He questioned Howard, asking if he had seen or heard anything about Gregory. Howard claimed he knew nothing about him. Before leaving, Guy asked for his name. Howard introduced himself as Bartholomew Mosier. Guy explains that he returned and searched through official records but couldn't find anyone named Bartholomew Mosier anywhere in Canada. That was when he realized Bartholomew Mosier was actually Howard Howe. He also became convinced that Gregory Gumtree had been held captive inside Howard's house. 1 month later, the authorities recovered Gregory's torso blocking a sewer pipe. By then, Howard had already vanished, as if he had never existed at all. Back at Pippy Hill, Howard sits beside Wallace on a rock. Leaning against Wallace's body, he begins singing softly. Thinking Wallace might be hungry, he hands him a mackerel to eat. At first, Wallace refuses, but after days of starvation, and with no other choice left, he finally begins eating the fish. Meanwhile, inside a car, Guy asks Allie and Teddy what Wallace usually drank or ate while driving. Allie tells him that Wallace loved convenience store drinks. They stop at a nearby store and show a picture of Wallace to the store girls and ask if they recognize him. The girls immediately identify Wallace, calling him Mr. Mustache. The story then flashes back to the moment Wallace visited the same store before meeting Howard Howe. While there, he had been speaking to Howard over the phone, with Howard guiding him toward his mansion. Wallace borrowed a piece of paper from the girls to write down Howard's address. The story returns to the present, and the girls hand the same note containing Howard's address to Guy. Inside his mansion, Howard teaches Wallace how to swim like a walrus. During this twisted lesson, Howard reveals that in order to survive on the island years ago, he had no choice but to kill the walrus that had saved his life. Sometime later, a rescue team discovered him and took him away. Addressing Wallace as Mr. Tusk, Howard says, "You were not prepared for me last time. You were not ready for the fight." This time, however, he gives Wallace a chance to defend himself. Howard suddenly submerges Wallace underwater, causing the poor man to gasp desperately for air. Outside the mansion, Guy, Teddy, and Allie discover Wallace's rented car submerged in a frozen river across the road. Before sneaking into Pippy Hill, Guy hands guns to Teddy and Allie while he arms himself with a shotgun to confront the deranged Howard Howe. Inside, Howard explains that he was rescued from the island years ago, barely an hour after he butchered the walrus that had saved him in order to stay alive. For the last 15 years, he says, I have honored this occasion by giving my flippered friend the fighting chance he never had. With that, Howard challenges Wallace to fight him until only one of them survives. Allie suddenly hears violent noises erupting from inside the mansion and immediately rushes toward the building. Howard tells Wallace that if he wants to live, he must kill him. With no other option left, Wallace engages in a horrifying battle against Howard. Realizing he is about to lose, Howard tears himself free from the walrus suit and prepares to kill Wallace with a crowbar. At that moment, Wallace stabs Howard's foot with his fangs, causing him to collapse onto the rocks. Seizing the opportunity, Wallace drives his tusks deep into Howard's chest, brutally killing him. Just then, Allie and Teddy burst into the enclave, only to freeze in shock at the horrifying sight before them. Wallace has completely transformed into a walrus-like creature, leaving Allie utterly devastated. Upon seeing his friends, Wallace roars violently, unable to form human words anymore. 1 year later, Teddy and Allie arrive at the Manitoba Sanctuary, where Wallace is now kept. Allie calls out to him, but he does not appear. She tosses a mackerel toward his shelter, and Wallace suddenly rushes out of his den, devouring the fish hungrily. Teddy tells him that he no longer needs to hide from them, yet Wallace shows no trace of human emotion. Desperate to reach him, Allie screams his name. Wallace slowly looks up at them and freezes for a moment, as if he still recognizes his old friends. Tears stream down Allie's face as she tells Wallace that she will always love him. After saying those words, she walks away with Teddy. Hearing her confession, the poor Wallace begins to cry, as though he is cursing himself for not listening to Allie that day. Quietly and broken, he retreats back into his den,